Good evening. I am Jane Garver. I am the Executive Director of the Little Traverse Historical Society in Petoskey, and welcome to our evening program. This series of programs is inspired by and taken from the 1974 evening programs that this society did each month in the year that the museum opened. So we're celebrating our 50th anniversary of opening the museum by revisiting the programs they did in that year. So I've taken notes from the different programs, from newspaper articles, and also just added some of my own information that I've done research on to bring you these programs. So I'll tell you that this particular program on early resort activities began with a recording of Hal Holbrook, the actor, as Mark Twain. It was I believe, a cassette recording in 1974. We won't be listening to that this evening, but the reason they did that was because Mark Twain had visited the area. And so they were trying to give a feel for what some early resort activities might have felt like, even though it wasn't actually Mark Twain on the recording, but you understand the point. So I believe that this particular program, when they gave it, they were trying to share what people might have been doing in Petoskey when they visited in what they called the early days. So that gives us kind of a broad range to work from, which is nice because I can share lots of different information with you. So most of the talk this evening comes from information from Frances Palethorpe. And I share this picture. She's very young in this picture. It's her high school graduation photo, but it's one that I really like of her. And Frances kept scrapbooks and notebooks and very meticulous notes, all written longhand. And so I've included on the slide a picture of her handwriting so you get the idea. And on this particular one, she's writing about Chief Petoskey. You can see his name there at the top. And at the end of this set of notes, she even says, "Sorry, I know my handwriting is terrible." And I said, "Thank you, Frances. Yes, I've been struggling reading some of her writing." But she wrote wonderful notes about the history of Petoskey. Her family was one of the first families to come after the trains came in 1875. And her father was an attorney who traveled around the county, and she traveled with him. And so she had a lot of information to share. So most of this information that I'm using came from Frances's notes. And when they actually gave the original program in 1974, they used her notes at that time. Frances was born in 1879. She died in 1968. She was known for her fiery red hair, which we can't see in the picture, and her storytelling. She was an art teacher in Petoskey for 46 years, responsible for the mural that many of us are familiar with that was painted in the high school and is now at North Central Michigan College. And she collected lots of Odawa art and basketry and boxes. And it's thanks to Frances that we have such a big collection of those things at the museum, as well as her notebooks and notes. So the first section of this talk deals with the Hiawatha Pageant. And I've got a map here to show you the pageant that I'm talking about took place here on Round Lake. You can get your bearings there, Harbor Point on the west, Crooked Lake there on the east. So the Hiawatha pageants were not just in Petoskey. They were all around in Canada and in the Midwest. And it was a dramatization and retelling of the Hiawatha poem by Longfellow. And the one in Petoskey was sponsored by or put on by the railroad. You can see here on this pamphlet, the Grand Rapids and Indiana Railroad has their logo right on the pamphlet. And they had a railroad spur that went from Petoskey to Round Lake so that you could ride the train right to the site of the Hiawatha pageant. So Frances was asked to run the craft workshop at the Hiawatha pageant by Mr. Armstrong, who was the railroad agent who had sort of put these programs together. And he had 75 Indigenous people from Canada who he brought to Petoskey to play the parts of the Native Americans in the Hiawatha pageant. They would all be acting and dramatizing the poem, and then the poem was read out loud, and it was also found in the program, so you could follow along with the poem. And it was done on the lake so that they could canoe and be out on the water, and they had different stands and things to do the program. So Frances writes that she was asked by Mr. Armstrong to do this craft center. She said they built a very nice little theater. The seats were like grandstand seats, and there were bedrooms under these seats, I'm assuming for the players. We reached them from steps at the back. They were very comfortable. I had charge of the workshop. And she says Indians. When the Indians were not at the play, they worked at crafts. As you came in and turned left, you found a very lovely restroom or lobby. We made curtains, and here's the lobby. We made curtains of cream cotton and painted on borders of Indian designs. Mr. Armstrong had them come on early and make bark furniture and bark boxes for ferns, etc. He let us have his beautiful rugs and pottery. We had a fine collection of Indian books, and most of these we sold. We had our own stationery with an Indian crest I had designed. Now, isn't that interesting? Frances, this white woman from Petoskey, had designed these Indian designs. The paper was linen. Just as you went into the lobby, there was a tea room, rustic furniture, boxes of ferns. We used sweetgrass mats and trays. We served sandwiches with brown bread, watercress, mayonnaise, and ham or chicken. And the watercress and yellow matched our mugs that we used for coffee in color. So Frances worked as sort of the craft liaison person, and the Indigenous people were making and selling crafts, but it was all part of the railroad. Here's another pamphlet that we have at the museum in our collection that talks more about the handicraft shop. It shows some people working on some pottery and gives you another idea of what that might have looked like. You can see the grandstand and some of the people. Grace Chandler Horn, a photographer who had a studio in town, did these photographs. And this is the libretto of the play, and we have several copies of this in our collection as well, with lots and lots of photographs. One thing I wanted to point out on the libretto is the swastika image, which was not a swastika when we think of Nazis. This is a Native American symbol, which many of them stopped using after it was co-opted by the Nazis. So you do sometimes see that on older pieces. Here's a panoramic view of the pageant. So you can see how elaborately done this was. And if we were in the audience, we would be sitting right viewing just like we are seeing this. And then they actually would dive off of the that tower as part of the program. So, oh, and I wanted to mention the dates of that 1903 to 1915, the Hiawatha pageant in that location. It was also done a couple times on the Bear River and done in Harbor Springs, as well as throughout the Midwest. So the next part of the 1974 program talked about Bayview, and you know that there's a lot to say about Bayview, but they certainly didn't say everything possible. There's books and books and books about it. But Bayview began in 1875, and we have in our collection some very nice programs. The one on the left here is a souvenir of Bayview and Petoskey. It's got lots and lots of illustrations. Most of them are Petoskey, but it does have some nice Bayview photographs. And then the history of Bayview the Beautiful, and that was given to us by Francis. The famous Northern Michigan resort. This is John M. Hall, and if you've been to Bayview, you know Hall Auditorium, which is named for him. Mr. Hall joined Bayview in 1885. It came from Flint, and he is described as full of intellectual vigor and a strong, engaging personality. He was dedicated to improving Bayview programs. And so he was one who brought in all kinds of programming between 1885 and 1914 in different books written about Bayview. His time period there is called the Expansion. So he was responsible for bringing in lots of different programming, from musical programming to speakers, to all different kinds of things. He passed away in 1914. The Women's Federated Clubs of Petoskey were very supportive of Mr. Hall and his efforts to build the auditorium. And so even though he had passed away, they still went on with their program. I was reading the Women's Club minutes, and they had a Petoskey night in 1914 and brought in people, just local people, to do Petoskey night at Bayview. But the Women's Federated Clubs were helping with fundraising for the auditorium and hosting luncheons and guest speakers and things like that to raise money for the auditorium. Here's one of the early assembly programs that we have in our collection. This is from 1893, and it says it's the 8th annual Bayview Assembly. But then in other articles and different things that I was reading in the paper, it would say the assembly began in 1908 or different things. Obviously, it didn't. Here we have 1893. But these programs are really similar to what you see today, with a list of all the different events happening at Bayview and all of the speakers and musical programs, but also there were lots of classes for different college credit, and you can see there listed university schools, and you could write to Bayview to get study programs. They had magazines that they mailed, so there were a lot more things going on as well. Also, if you look carefully in the officers list, you can see some names you might recognize. There's Henry Loud Hall at Bayview, and John M. Hall for Hall Auditorium. And he was listed there as superintendent. Here are some early shots of just activities at Bayview. So certainly lots of people from around the country, of course, were coming to Bayview even then, but also local people, as we do today, took part in activities there. The assembly chorus of 300 voices. I thought that this was an impressive picture. And this was another early 1890, I think it was 1890, 91. This was a menu from a celebration. This was in 1900. They did the 25th anniversary. And this menu is in our collection. Some names on the left. You might see it's a little bit blurry, but you can see C.J. Palethorpe there. That's Francis's father. And then the menu. I love menus. I think they're fascinating. And of course, they served broiled whitefish, but also beef and chicken and terrapin and mayonnaise of lobster. So I guess you just got a hint of lobster in your mayonnaise, perhaps. Some of the programs that were offered at Bayview, of course, they've had many, many notable people performing and speaking there. This is Ernestine Schaumann Henk. She was there in 1910, and she was an opera singer of, she was an Austrian American, a notable opera singer. William Jennings Bryan. We also have a picture of the crowd gathered around the museum when it was a depot, when he spoke there on his tour. But he spoke at Bayview in 1911. He stayed at the Bayview House. They used to list in the newspaper all the people who were staying at different hotels, and he's listed at Bayview House this week that he was there. He was introduced before his speech by Governor Thomas Marshall of Indiana, who later became vice president under Woodrow Wilson. And Mr. Marshall stayed at the Cushman Hotel in Petoskey and was known to do that most summers throughout his life, throughout his time as vice president. But he introduced William Jennings Bryan. The newspaper talked about Mr. Bryan as having a silver tongue. He spoke with his usual silver tongue. And he said in his speech that evening that he was more interested in religion than politics. The editor of the paper said it was interesting to see so many people malign him, but then flock to his speeches, and said that it was a very crowded evening. In 1912, Booker T. Washington was one of many speakers at Bayview, and I couldn't find anything that talked specifically about his presentation, but I did find that he was traveling the country that summer, giving talks to different teachers' organizations and at different colleges, and he is listed in a long list of people who were speaking at Bayview in 1912. The article talks about, it was in June, talking about the opening of the season and how they hadn't been very good the past few years, even though they just had the opera star and the William Jennings Bryan, but that this summer things were going to be great. And one of the speakers was Booker T. Washington. And then in 1913, Helen Keller came to Bayview, and it said that she came with her longtime teacher, Mrs. Macy, which was not the name that I knew for her teacher, but that was who came with her, it said. And that teacher gave an introductory speech before Helen Keller. And then Helen Keller's topic was the heart and the hand, or the right use of our senses, which is, of course, apropos. So the next part of the program is about the Opera House. And the Opera House is sort of a mystery because we can't find any pictures of the actual Opera House. I've been searching and searching. There's sort of some vague ones of in the great big picture of the town. First of all, in August of 1883, there's an article in the paper that the Shirk brothers are talking of converting their building into an opera house, and it would cost $18,000, and the stage and scenery would cost, the number looks very strange there. I think they mean 2,500. They've got an extra zero in the article. So they're saying everyone's so enthusiastic. This is 1883, and the town would certainly do well to have an opera house. It didn't materialize. The map here, I don't know if you can see I don't think you can see my cursor, but anyway, if you find Bay Street at the top of the map and come over to the left, just below where the 8 is in 1883, that's where the Opera House was eventually, but not in 1883. So not until 1891 did they actually open an opera house. And so there was this big article in the paper, big advertisement, Harwood and Rose, the proprietors of the Grand Opera House, opens June 1st of 91. A spacious and handsome theater just completed, a capacity for 1,000, handsome scenery and all the modern appliances. And I purposely also cut out the other half of the advertisement because I just thought that was nice to see the steamship line, the Northern Michigan line from Chicago and Milwaukee, and then showing us all the little stops along the way. So it's how a lot of people were still getting here, and also by train, of course. So in the summer of 1892, we can see that they're advertising. And if you go through the newspapers, there's a different program every week, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. And they were groups that were traveling around mostly by train, some by boat. And there will be little things in the paper about the newspaper editor from Traverse City has telegraphed us to say that the such and such program that is coming to the opera was very well received when it was in Traverse City yesterday, and they're on their way to Petoskey now on the train, that kind of thing. And you can see the prices there at the bottom, 25, 35, and 50 cents. Admission 50 cents, reserve seats 75 cents, but all different kinds of things. So even though it's called an opera house, there are speakers, and this was the equestrian curriculum. So they had horses, mules, and ponies. They had the phenomenal boy soprano from the Detroit Philharmonic Club. They had plays that were put on, all different kinds of things. So not just operas at the Opera House. Here is one from the paper. Blunders was the name of the play, and it carries all its own scenery and does not use any of the scenery of the Opera House. And when I was looking through the newspapers, they were really promoting Blunders and kept talking about how it was so good and it was coming and here it comes and everyone go see it, that kind of thing. And then the gymnast was there, and notice they have barbells and tumbling and fancy and daring feats. And then also the Beethoven quartet, because what goes better with gymnastics than Beethoven? They also performed some operas, and the HMS Pinafore was performed in 1894 with local talent. So there were articles in the paper inviting people to come to try out to be in Pinafore. It said things like you don't have to have talent to come and be a part of the show, that sort of thing. But they had brought in a director or someone from somewhere else who was going to use the local talent to put on this performance. And then he would go to the next town and do the same thing, which sounds like a very difficult job if you don't know any of your performers or who you might get. And then Mark Twain came in 1895. So there were several different articles about his visit, saying that he will be coming on July 20th, and that the price of tickets were $1.75 and 50 cents. And then after he spoke, a whole very long article about how it was a packed house and how he was so entertaining and wonderful. And then I like in the one on the right how they put his name in quotes and then his actual name, Samuel Clemens, underneath, just in case you didn't know. But he gave a 90-minute talk. He stayed at the Arlington Hotel and was on a tour of the Midwest. He had come from Mackinac, came to Petoskey, and then went west to Minnesota from here. This is Porter J. White, a vaudeville star. Lots of vaudeville acts were also brought to the Opera House. And one thing about the Opera House was that it did operate year round. So this was in October that Porter White was there, and he was from, I believe, Ohio, and had a traveling troupe, a vaudeville troupe. But they did bring groups in almost year round, rather than just in the summer, which is interesting because we often think of ourselves as mostly a summer resort. So the last part of the talk is about the circus. So I just, when I was looking at the 1974 program, I thought it was so interesting, the things that they put together. The Hiawatha Pageant, Bayview, the Opera House, and then the circus. So the first mention I could find of the circus was in 1877. So remember, the trains came really in 1874, mostly starting to gear up in 1875. So in 1877, and it says the Great Australian Circus. Now, was it really an Australian circus? I don't know, but that's what they were called. But they visited Petoskey June 1st, and they've busted. I assume they've gone bankrupt. So that was the first circus mention that I could find. And then in May of 1882, the Sells Brothers interior circus, which I think means they had a tent, and the Roman Hippodrome. So they had a lot of horses. and they came to Petoskey. They were written up in the newspaper as a show that you shouldn't have missed out on, and lots of people did because the posters to advertise it didn't get up in time, and it was really too bad that everyone in town thought that it was going to be a bad show based on the show that had come last year on the steamship, and this one was really much better, and it was too bad that everybody missed it, was what it said in the newspaper. And it said that it included fabulous acts, the Quinet Children on the Trapeze, and equestrian Emma Stickney. And I couldn't find out anything about them, but at the time, they were apparently big names because Emma Stickney was at the top of her profession, according to the paper. And it looks like quite a show when you look at the images here. In September of 1882, Meyer's Great Western Circus came to Petoskey. So this is the second circus in a year that visited us. So lots of performers were traveling around on trains and visiting different places. So this circus was performed on a vacant lot at the east end of Mitchell Street. And then the Ringling Brothers Circus came in 1895. And this was an ad in the paper. And of course, the Ringling Brothers, all kinds of different acts. The Three Ring Circus, the Millionaire Menagerie, and a street parade over a mile long. So different years, the circus was performed in different places. A few times it was where the Bayview Golf Course is, right there when you come down Division Hill and turn the lower part of the golf course. That's where they held the circus for a few years. They also held it out of town at Kagomic. So in different places, but they would, when Ringling Brothers came, they had a big parade in town to advertise that they were in town. Here's another one when they came in 1897 and they brought the elephants, and the elephants paraded right downtown. And I've got a picture of that for you too. Here we have the elephants walking through town, the circus parade. And then in Frances's notes, remember this was all from Frances Palethorpe's notes. She did mention that Chief Petoskey, who you saw his name on that, on her handwritten notes, that Chief Petoskey liked to take little kids to the circus. Chief Petoskey, who died in 1885, and so he must not have gone to these Ringling Brothers circuses, but to maybe the earlier ones that I mentioned. So I thought that was very interesting. Ringling Brothers, this circus with all the elephants, it said in the newspaper that they sold 19,000 tickets. 19,000 tickets. And that the GR&I Railroad handled 23,000 people who were coming to the shows. The fare was 5 cents, and they had 7 trains flying over the track. They had afternoon and evening shows. And they said that Petoskey was a good stop for the circus because of the crossing at the Straits. And so they either needed to stop in Petoskey before they traveled to the UP, or they needed to stop after they had been traveling from the UP because of the Straits crossing. And so Petoskey just seemed like a really good spot for circuses, apparently, and other performers as well. But it amazed me to read 19,000 tickets sold. That's an incredible amount of tickets. I can't imagine that many people at an event. Of course, it was multiple circus performances. They used, as I said, the Bayview Golf Course for some shows. Heavy trucks destroyed the road, and the railroad came in right away and repaired it because the railroad was apparently worried about having sponsored the circus or something, and having so many people come through. And of course, the elephants were the most popular act. The program in 1974 ended with a display of the new Victorian parlor, which is no longer there at the museum, but it was one of the first displays that was put up there. So they were at the museum, even though the museum was only open that summer in August and only open in the afternoon. So we'll be open in June and open all summer for you to visit us. Our next program will be in April, and you can visit our website to register for the program. And I also will send out reminders and newsletters. And I wanted to show you on our website. So if you go, when you go to our website, you can see our calendar of events. And here we're celebrating our 50th anniversary. And here's the list. So April 18th, I'll be talking about the mills on the Bear River. That'll be a Zoom program, but then in May, I'll be doing programs at the museum. So I'll do those throughout the summer. And then we'll go back to Zoom in November. We have lots of other programs planned for the summer as well. So I hope that you'll check the calendar of events for different things. And then I also wanted to remind you that you can visit the collections tab. And this is how you can see all kinds of pictures. You can search for photographs that you're interested in. Up here, you can just browse the different collections, see what recently added items. So we've got lots of ships and steamships that were recently added. So that might be of interest to you as well. All right, so I'll stop sharing. And if anyone has any questions, I can try to answer them. Are there any questions? Okay, well, thank you for joining me. And I hope to see you again on April 18th or this summer at the museum. Have a good night.